Human Janitor, repaired alien weapon queen, spent centuries trying to repair. John Matthews was not a man of high rank. He wasn't an engineer, scientist, or even a skilled technician. He was a janitor, the person others didn't give a second thought to. But what he lacked in prestige, he made up for in quiet curiosity. For years, he had been working aboard the massive alien space station, a sprawling structure that orbited a star on the brink of death. The station was a monument to a forgotten era, its once glorious halls now dim and abandoned. Only a few humans were assigned to maintain the place, cleaning the remnants of alien civilization. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well enough for John to get by. The work was mostly routine, scrubbing floors, maintaining systems, and ensuring the station remained operational. Most of the other workers hardly noticed John. He was just part of the background, but he had a secret. John had an interest in things beyond cleaning. Before joining the crew, he had been a skilled mechanic, though his expertise had never been put to use. The opportunity to work on the station, even as a janitor, gave him a chance to reconnect with his old skills. During his free hours, he would wander the forgotten parts of the station, his hands itching to repair things. It was on one of these late-night strolls that he found it. Tucked away in an obscure corner of the station, far from the eyes of the crew, was a room that hadn't been touched in centuries. The door was hidden behind layers of dust, and the floor was covered in cobwebs. But John, drawn by an irresistible pull, opened the door. What lay inside was beyond anything he could have imagined. The room was vast, its walls lined with ancient machinery, most of it inert. But at the center of the room was something massive, a weapon. It was unlike anything John had ever seen. The weapon was almost organic in shape, its surface smooth and sleek, though jagged at certain points. It had strange, glowing symbols etched into it, some of which seemed to flicker and pulse as if the weapon itself was alive. It looked almost like a relic, as though it had been abandoned and forgotten for centuries. John's heart raced as he stepped closer to it. It seemed out of place here in this abandoned section of the station. The glowing symbols caught his attention. He could feel a strange energy in the air, like the weapon was waiting for someone to activate it. His fingers brushed the surface, and the weapon hummed, almost as if it responded to his touch. He quickly pulled his hand back, startled, but the humming didn't stop. Instead, it grew louder, vibrating through the floor and into his bones. Curiosity overwhelmed him, and despite his caution, he began to examine the weapon more closely. There were strange panels embedded in its surface, each one more intricate than the last. John's mind, trained in mechanics, tried to make sense of the symbols and the structure. There were no obvious control panels, no visible switches or levers. Everything about the weapon was unlike anything he had encountered. But as John studied it, something began to click in his mind. The patterns on the surface of the weapon resembled some old schematics he had seen years ago when he had worked as a mechanic. The technology was foreign, yet familiar. He traced his fingers over the markings, and suddenly a deep voice filled the room, startling him. "Repair me," the voice commanded, its tone cold and regal. John stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced around, but there was no one else in the room. The voice was coming from nowhere, yet it felt as if it was directly inside his mind. Who are you?" John muttered, his voice trembling. "Fix the weapon," the voice repeated, its demand unwavering. "Only you can do it." John's mind raced. He had no idea what was going on. He wasn't an engineer anymore, and he had never worked on anything this advanced. Yet, as he stood there, staring at the weapon, he felt an overwhelming urge to obey. It was as if the weapon itself was calling to him, urging him to repair it. And somehow, deep within, he knew he had the skills to do so. He hesitated for a moment, looking around the room again. But there was no one to stop him. No one would know what he was doing. So without fully understanding why, he knelt down beside the weapon, his fingers moving over the surface. As he touched certain parts, he felt a strange warmth radiate from the weapon. It was almost as if the machine was responding to him, acknowledging his presence. The more he worked, the more confident he became. The symbols on the surface began to glow brighter, and the hum of the weapon grew stronger. He felt a sense of accomplishment, of power, as though he was unlocking a secret hidden within the weapon's design. It was a feeling he hadn't had in years, the joy of fixing something that was broken. But just as he was beginning to feel a sense of progress, a strange sensation washed over him. A voice, different from the one he had heard earlier, filled the room once more. This time it was urgent, pleading. "Do not finish the repairs," the voice warned, its tone filled with fear. "The weapon is not meant for you, it will bring destruction." John froze. The voice was unlike anything he had heard before, and it sent a chill down his spine. He glanced at the weapon, uncertain whether he should continue. But the urge to finish the task was overwhelming. It was as if the weapon was feeding off his determination, using his curiosity to guide him further. He looked at the weapon once more, his fingers hovering over the final panel. The voice was still there, pleading with him to stop. But John's mind was made up. He had come this far, and he couldn't back out now. With a deep breath, he pressed the final panel. The weapon responded instantly. The hum grew louder, and the air around John seemed to crackle with energy. For a moment, he thought he had made a mistake. But then the weapon began to glow, its symbols lighting up in brilliant patterns. John stepped back, his eyes wide with awe. The weapon was alive. It had been repaired. But what had he just unleashed? As the weapon continued to pulse with energy, a hologram flickered to life before him. It was the image of an alien queen, her eyes cold and calculating, her presence overwhelming. "Finally," she said, her voice filled with authority. "You have done what no one else could." John's heart skipped a beat. The queen's image was like nothing he had ever seen. Her features were both beautiful and terrifying, a mixture of grace and power. She looked down at him with a gaze that seemed to pierce his very soul. "You have no idea what you've done, human," she said, her voice low and commanding. "But now you are bound to me. And you will repair the rest of my empire." John's breath caught in his throat. He had unwittingly activated something far beyond his understanding. The weapon, the alien queen, everything was connected. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was part of something far greater than he could ever have imagined. John Matthews could barely comprehend the weight of the situation. The weapon was no ordinary machine, and the queen's appearance had left him in a haze of confusion. The hologram flickered before him, her cold eyes locked onto his as if she could peer into his very soul. She had spoken with an authority that made him feel small, insignificant, but also strangely important. The weapon hummed softly, glowing with the intensity of a star. He had no idea what he had just activated, but it was clear that this was no ordinary relic. It was something far more powerful, and now it seemed to have a life of its own. The queen's voice was still ringing in his mind, her command clear. He was bound to her, whether he liked it or not. He had repaired the weapon, a feat that no one else had been able to accomplish, and now it was his responsibility to help her restore her empire. John knew he didn't fully understand what that meant, but he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. "Why me?" he whispered to himself, his voice trembling with both fear and curiosity. He turned his gaze back to the weapon, its alien symbols glowing brightly in the dim room. He had never encountered anything like this before. It wasn't just technology, it was something more, something that seemed to resonate with his very being. As the days passed, John found himself returning to the weapon again and again, unable to stay away. He couldn't explain why, but the strange pull it exerted on him was undeniable. The hologram of the queen continued to appear, sometimes speaking in riddles, sometimes in commands, but always with a calm and assured voice. "Human," she said one evening, her voice booming in the silence of the room. "You must understand what you've awakened. This weapon was not built to destroy, at least, not entirely. It was meant to restore balance to the universe, to bring order to chaos. But my people betrayed me. They sabotaged my creation, and for centuries I have searched for someone who could finish what was started." John stood frozen, staring at the glowing image of the queen. "But why me?" he asked again, his voice barely a whisper. "Because," she said, her tone sharp, "you possess something they did not. You have the ability to see beyond the surface, to understand things that others cannot. That is why the weapon chose you. It is not merely a tool of war, it is a force of nature. And now it is yours to command." John felt a chill run down his spine. He had never thought of himself as special. In fact, most people he knew would have considered him just another ordinary man, a janitor cleaning up after others. But somehow, the weapon, this ancient, powerful machine, had chosen him. And now he had a part to play in a story much larger than he could have imagined. The hologram flickered again, and the queen's image shifted. She looked different now, as if the light around her had changed. The hologram's expression softened, but there was still a coldness in her eyes, a sadness that seemed to echo across the centuries. When the weapon was first built, she began, her voice quieter now, it was meant to be a symbol of peace. My people, the Emirians, were an ancient race, long before the stars were mapped. We created technology to guide civilizations toward harmony, toward understanding. But my vision was shattered. The very people I trusted turned against me, and they fractured our empire, sending us into a war that never ended. John could sense the weight in her words, the history that had shaped her. She was not just a ruler, she was a survivor of unimaginable loss. Her people, her empire, all of it had been torn apart, leaving her alone with nothing but the weapon and a desire for revenge. I failed, she whispered, her voice full of regret. I failed to see the signs, to trust the right people, but you, human, you can fix what was broken. You can finish what I started. John felt conflicted. He didn't know what the Queen's ultimate goal was. Was she truly seeking peace, or was there something more sinister in her plans? The more he worked on the weapon, the more he learned about its power. But every answer only seemed to raise more questions. As the days went by, the station grew more tense. John could feel it. The weapon's power was growing, its influence spreading. He could no longer deny the reality of what he had unlocked. The Queen's presence was always there, watching him, guiding him. But he began to sense something else, something more ominous. The rebels aboard the station, a small group of alien dissidents who opposed the Queen's rule, had taken notice of the weapon's activation. They had their own reasons for wanting to stop the Queen, but they also saw John as a threat. He had become the focal point of a power struggle far beyond his understanding. One evening, as John worked late in the weapon's chamber, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, but it wasn't the Queen's hologram this time. It was a group of alien rebels, their faces hidden behind masks, their eyes filled with determination. "We know what you've done," one of them said, his voice low and threatening. "You've activated the weapon, haven't you?" John stepped back, his heart racing. He didn't know how to respond. The weapon was beyond his control now, and the rebels seemed determined to stop him from completing it. "You don't understand," John said, his voice shaking. "I don't want to be part of this. I'm just a janitor. I didn't ask for any of this." The rebels scoffed. "It doesn't matter what you want," one of them said. "The weapon is too powerful to be left in the hands of someone who doesn't understand its true purpose. You've unknowingly activated the most dangerous tool in the galaxy. You have to shut it down, or we will." John stood frozen, his mind racing. He had been caught in a conflict he didn't understand. The Queen's promises of peace and order seemed hollow now, and the rebels' warnings only added to his confusion. He wanted to believe that he was doing the right thing, but the more he learned about the weapon, the less certain he became. The rebels advanced toward him, their eyes burning with resolve. But before they could reach him, the weapon's energy surged, filling the room with a blinding light. The hologram of the Queen appeared once more, her image now more vibrant than ever. "Leave him be," the Queen's voice commanded, her tone filled with authority. "The weapon is mine to control. No one will stop us now." John could feel the power radiating from the weapon, as if it was alive, as if it had its own will. The rebels hesitated, their weapons drawn but their resolve wavering. The Queen's presence was overwhelming, and it seemed as though they were powerless against her. "This is your last warning," the rebel leader said, his voice strained. "Shut it down, or we will do whatever it takes to stop you." John was caught in the middle, torn between the Queen's promises and the rebels' threats. The weapon, now fully activated, pulsed with an energy that seemed to fill the room. He realized that his next decision would determine the fate of the galaxy. But before he could make up his mind, a voice echoed in his head, not from the Queen, but from somewhere deeper within the weapon itself. "Do not fear," the voice whispered. "You have the power to decide. The choice is yours." John closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. The weapon was in his hands now, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing. He could sense the potential for both creation and destruction, but which path would he choose? The rebels watched him, their eyes filled with expectation. The Queen's voice rang in his mind once more, urging him to finish the weapon's restoration. But John knew that the power he wielded was not just in his hands, it was in his heart. John Matthews never imagined that his life would come to this. What had started as a simple job, as a janitor aboard a decaying space station, had quickly spiraled into a battle over the fate of an ancient weapon. a weapon so powerful it could reshape the entire galaxy. But now John found himself caught in the middle of a conflict he didn't understand. The weapon was alive, humming with energy, and he was the one who had activated it. The alien queen, who had once been a mighty ruler of a vast empire, had made it clear that she needed him to complete her vision of order and control. But the rebels, a group of alien dissidents, were just as determined to stop him, believing that the weapon was far too dangerous to be left in anyone's hands, especially not his. John had no answers, no way to know what the right thing to do was. He was just a man who had fixed machines, cleaned hallways, and kept to himself for years. Now, suddenly, he was the center of a galactic struggle. As the days passed, the weight of the weapon's power pressed down on him. He could feel its energy in the air, vibrating with an intensity that seemed to pulse through his entire body. It was as though the weapon itself was aware of him, watching his every move. The Queen's voice continued to echo in his mind, urging him to finish what he had started, but John was growing uneasy. The more he learned about the weapon, the more he realized that he didn't fully understand it. And worse, the Queen's promises of peace and order began to sound more and more like empty words. One evening, John stood before the weapon, his fingers hovering over the control panel. The rebels were getting closer, their presence more evident as the station's corridors grew quieter. They were planning something, but John didn't know what. All he knew was that the Queen's forces were just as relentless in their pursuit of the weapon, and he was caught in the middle. A soft noise behind him broke his thoughts. He turned quickly, half expecting another rebel attack, but instead he saw a familiar face, one of the station's maintenance workers, a woman named Lena. She had been part of the team that cleaned the upper levels of the station, but she wasn't a rebel. At least not in the way the others were. She was a quiet, reserved woman, much like John, someone who had always kept to herself. But now she was standing before him, her eyes wide with concern. "John, we need to talk," she said, her voice low but urgent. John frowned, confused. "About what?" Lena stepped closer, glancing over her shoulder nervously. "You know what's happening. The rebels are closing in. They've sent out a message saying they'll stop at nothing to destroy the weapon." John's heart sank. He had suspected as much. The rebels had been getting more aggressive, but he hadn't realized they were this close. "But why?" John asked, his voice shaking. "Why do they want to destroy it?" Lena hesitated, clearly struggling with her words. "Because they believe the weapon will bring about destruction. They think that whoever controls it will have the power to destroy entire worlds. And they're right, John. That's what it can do. The Queen's people, they were the ones who made it, but they lost control of it. It was never meant to be used by one person. It was meant to bring balance." John stared at her, his mind racing. "So what should I do? Should I destroy it?" Lena looked at the weapon, her expression unreadable. "I don't know, but I don't think the Queen is telling you the whole truth. She wants to use the weapon for her own purposes, to restore her empire, to bring it back to its former glory. But that's not the only thing it can do. It has the power to reshape the galaxy, to make it what she wants it to be, but that might not be what's best for everyone else." John was silent for a long moment, processing her words. He had never considered the possibility that the Queen wasn't telling him everything. But now that he thought about it, it made sense. She had been so insistent that he complete the weapon, so focused on her vision of peace and order. But was it truly peace she wanted, or was it control? "I can't just shut it down," John said finally, his voice filled with frustration. "The weapon is too powerful and I've already activated it. If I try to stop now, I'll destroy everything I've worked for, but I don't know if I can trust her." Lena nodded, understanding. "I don't think you can trust her, and I don't think you should trust the rebels either. They're just as determined to use the weapon for their own purposes." She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on John. "But you have an advantage. You're not part of their game. You're not one of them. You can choose something else, something different." John looked at the weapon, its power still radiating through the room. He could feel its pull, urging him to finish the repairs. But he wasn't sure if he was ready for what would happen next. He wasn't sure if anyone was. "What do I do now?" he asked quietly. Lena took a deep breath, her voice steady. "You don't have to make the decision alone. The rebels might want to destroy the weapon, but they're not the only ones who can help. There are others on the station, people who understand what the weapon truly is, and they don't want the Queen to have it. If you're willing to work with them, you can stop her." John felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in days, he felt like there was a way out of this nightmare. The Queen had been manipulating him, trying to get him to finish the weapon so she could use it for her own gain. But if he could work with Lena, with others who understood the weapon's true power, maybe they could find a way to stop her without destroying everything. "Who are these people?" John asked. Lena looked around cautiously. "I can't tell you right now, but I can take you to them. They'll help you. They want to make sure the weapon doesn't fall into the wrong hands." John hesitated, torn between his loyalty to the Queen and his growing sense of doubt. But as he looked at Lena, something told him that this was his chance to do the right thing. He could no longer trust the Queen's vision of peace. He had to find another way. "Okay," he said finally, "take me to them." Lena nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and determination. "I'll take you, but we have to hurry. The rebels are getting closer, and they won't stop until they find you." With that, she led John down the darkened corridors of the station, her steps swift and quiet. They moved quickly, knowing that time was running out. The weapon, now fully activated, pulsed with energy, but John no longer felt its pull in the same way. He had a new goal now, one that didn't involve finishing the Queen's plans. He was going to find another way, a way that didn't involve destruction, a way that could stop the Queen's reign without losing everything. As they made their way through the maze of hallways, John couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The stakes were higher than ever, and the fate of the galaxy rested on his next choice. Would he choose to follow the Queen's path, or would he forge his own? The answer, he realized, was in his hands. The halls of the space station had grown eerily quiet as John Matthews followed Lena through the maze of corridors. The distant hum of the weapon echoed faintly, a constant reminder of the power they were up against. John's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened so far. The weapon, the Queen, the rebels, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. Yet, as he walked alongside Lena, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was finally heading in the right direction. The chance to make a difference, to stop the Queen's plan before it was too late, was within reach. Lena moved quickly, her eyes darting around as she led John through the dimly lit passages. They passed abandoned rooms, long-forgotten workstations, and strange alien technology that seemed to pulse with life. John barely took notice of the surroundings anymore. His focus was entirely on what lay ahead. The rebels were closing in, and every second counted. They had to find a way to reach the people who could help them stop the Queen. "Just a little further," Lena whispered, her voice urgent. "We're almost there." John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what they were walking into. The rebels weren't going to let him simply walk away with the weapon. They would try to stop him, and the Queen, who was still so determined to use the weapon for her own purposes, wouldn't make it easy either. The conflict between the two factions had been brewing for far too long, and now it was all coming to a head. They turned a corner, and John saw a small door ahead, almost hidden in the shadows. Lena approached it quickly and glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was following them. When she was satisfied, she reached out and pressed a button beside the door. It slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow hallway beyond. "This is it," Lena said, motioning for John to follow her inside. John stepped through the doorway, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The hallway was dim, lit only by flickering lights overhead. At the end of the corridor was another door, this one heavily reinforced. It looked like a place meant to be kept hidden from prying eyes. Lena approached the door and tapped a series of codes into a keypad beside it. After a moment, the door slid open, revealing a group of individuals gathered inside. They were a mix of species, some humanoid, others less familiar, but they all had one thing in common. They were determined to stop the Queen and her weapon from falling into the wrong hands. "This is the Resistance," Lena said, her voice low. "They've been working against the Queen for years. They're the ones who can help us." John looked around, taking in the faces of the rebels. They didn't look like much. They were a ragtag group, dressed in mismatched armor and clothing, their expressions serious and worn. But there was something about them, something that told John they weren't just a group of rebels. They were people who had seen the worst of the universe, and they had survived. One of the rebels, a tall, wiry man with silver skin and sharp features, stepped forward. He looked John up and down before extending a hand. "You're the one who activated the weapon, aren't you?" the man asked, his voice steady but guarded. John hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I didn't mean to, it just happened." The man's eyes softened slightly. We don't care how it happened. What matters now is what you're going to do with it. Lena stepped in. We need your help. The Queen is using the weapon for her own purposes. She's going to use it to restore her empire, but it's too dangerous. We can't let her control it. We need to stop her before it's too late. The silver-skinned man nodded slowly. We've been tracking her for years. We know what she's capable of, but we don't have the firepower to take her down without help. That's where you come in, Matthews. John felt a surge of unease. What do you need me to do? We need to get to the control center, the man explained. It's where the Queen's forces are stationed. If we can take control of the station's systems, we can disable the weapon before she can use it. But we'll need to get past her forces first. And that's where you come in. John frowned, unsure of what he was being asked to do. What do you mean? I'm just a janitor. I can't fight. The man smiled, a small, knowing smile. You've already done something no one else could. You've activated the weapon. That makes you invaluable to us. You know how it works, how to control it. We need you to help us get to the control center, and then you'll need to shut it down. John was silent for a moment, the weight of the request settling heavily on his shoulders. He had never imagined himself as a fighter, as someone who would take on a powerful queen and her army. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had no choice. The queen had already manipulated him once, using his skills to activate the weapon. Now he had a chance to undo what he had done to stop the weapon from causing the destruction the queen desired. I'll do it, John said finally, his voice firm. But I can't do it alone. You won't be alone, Lena reassured him. We'll be with you every step of the way. With that, the group began to prepare. They gathered weapons, strategized their plan of attack, and set out toward the control center. As they moved through the station, John couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose he had never known before. The Queen's forces were closing in, but now he wasn't alone. The resistance was with him, and together they would take on the Queen and her weapon. The journey was tense, every step fraught with danger. The station's corridors seemed endless, the walls closing in around them as they made their way deeper into the heart of the station. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. But John kept moving forward, his resolve hardening with each passing moment. They reached the control center, and John felt his heart race as they approached the heavily guarded doors. The rebels had done their best to avoid detection, but it was clear that the Queen's forces were aware of their presence. The tension in the air was thick, and John could feel the weapon's power thrumming beneath his feet, waiting to be unleashed. We're almost there, Lena whispered, her voice tense. Stay focused. John nodded, his hand tightening around the control panel he had brought with him. He could feel the weight of the weapon's power, the responsibility that came with it. The Queen was waiting, and soon John would have to make the most important decision of his life. Would he use the weapon to stop her, or would he find another way? The doors to the control center slid open, revealing the Queen's forces. They were ready for them. The battle had begun. John Matthews stood at the threshold of the control center, his heart pounding in his chest. The weapon, pulsing with raw energy, seemed to call to him, urging him to finish what he had started. He could feel its power vibrating beneath his feet, a constant reminder of what was at stake. The Queen's forces were waiting just beyond the door, their presence looming over him like a shadow. And yet, John's thoughts weren't on the battle that was about to unfold. They were on the weapon itself and what it represented. The rebels had made it clear the Queen couldn't be trusted. She wanted the weapon for her own purposes, to restore her empire and control the galaxy once more. But John had learned something over the course of these long, tense days. The weapon was more than just a tool of war. It was a force of nature, capable of shaping the very fabric of the universe. And now, for better or worse, he was the one who held the key to its power. He turned to Lena, who was standing beside him, her face serious and focused. The rest of the resistance group was gathered behind them, weapons in hand, ready for whatever came next. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was yet to come. Are you ready? Lena asked quietly, her voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. John took a deep breath, his fingers gripping the control panel tightly. He nodded. I don't know if I am, but I don't have a choice. Lena gave him a reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. We're in this together. He nodded again, more to himself than to her. They had come this far, and they weren't turning back now. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The doors to the control center slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room bathed in dim light. The Queen's forces were scattered throughout the room, standing guard around the weapon's central control panel. At the far end of the room, standing tall and regal, was the Queen herself, her alien form exuding an air of authority and power. Her cold eyes locked onto John as soon as he entered, her lips curling into a smile that sent a chill down his spine. "Well, well," the Queen said, her voice like a melody of ancient power. "The human arrives at last." John didn't speak. He didn't need to. The Queen had already made her intentions clear. She wanted the weapon, and she would stop at nothing to get it. But John was no longer the frightened janitor who had accidentally activated the machine. He was something more now. The weapon had chosen him for a reason, and he wasn't going to let the Queen use it to bring about the chaos and destruction she sought. The Queen's eyes narrowed as she took a step forward. "You've made a grave mistake, human. You have no idea what you've unleashed." "I know exactly what I've unleashed," John replied, his voice steady, "and I'm not going to let you control it." The Queen laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the control center. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a pawn in a much larger game. The weapon is mine, and I will use it to restore my empire. You cannot stop me." John's gaze shifted to the weapon, its surface glowing with an intensity that seemed to fill the room. He could feel its power calling to him, urging him to take control, to use it to defeat the Queen once and for all. But something inside him hesitated. The weapon was too powerful. It wasn't meant to be used by one person, no matter how noble their intentions. "You don't get it," John said, taking a step forward, his voice gaining strength. "The weapon isn't yours to control. It never was. It was made to bring balance, not power. You're just using it for your own selfish goals." The Queen's eyes flashed with anger, her patience wearing thin. "You know nothing about the weapon, human. You have no idea what it's capable of. I will make you understand. I will make you see the truth." She raised her hand, and the weapon's energy surged, crackling through the room like a storm. The air grew thick with tension as the Queen prepared to strike, her forces moving to intercept the rebels. The battle had begun, but John wasn't afraid. He knew what he had to do. The Queen's forces advanced, weapons drawn, but John's focus never wavered. He pressed a series of buttons on the control panel, activating the weapon systems. The room shook as the weapon responded, its energy increasing exponentially. The Queen's forces faltered, their steps slowing as the weapon's power filled the room. "Stop!" the Queen commanded, but her voice was drowned out by the weapon's roar. John reached out, his hand hovering above the control panel, and for a moment he could feel the weapon's energy coursing through him. It was more than just power. It was raw potential, a force of creation and destruction intertwined. He knew that if he continued, he would be able to destroy the Queen, to stop her once and for all. But he also knew that doing so would change everything. The weapon could destroy more than just the Queen. It could reshape the galaxy, create a new order, or plunge everything into chaos. He glanced at the rebels, who were fighting off the Queen's forces, their resolve unwavering. They had come this far, but they couldn't win without him. The weapon was the key to everything, but John had to make a choice. Did he use it to defeat the Queen, or did he shut it down and risk everything? John took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling on him. The weapon could be a force for good, or it could be a tool of destruction. He had the power to choose. "Human," the Queen shouted, her voice desperate, "you can't destroy everything. You don't understand what you're doing." But John did understand. The weapon wasn't just a tool. It was a reflection of those who wielded it. If he used it for revenge, for power, it would consume him, just as it had consumed the Queen. But if he used it for balance, for peace, he could stop the cycle of destruction that had been set in motion centuries ago. With a final, decisive movement, John pressed the button that would shut down the weapon systems. The room went silent, the energy fading as the weapon powered down. The Queen staggered back, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No!" she screamed, but it was too late. The weapon's power was gone. John turned to the rebels who had managed to push the Queen's forces back. The battle was over. The Queen was defeated, her plans shattered. But John knew that this was just the beginning. The weapon was still there, still a powerful force. But it was no longer in the hands of anyone who sought to control it. The Queen collapsed to the ground, her power stripped away. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice filled with defeat. "I was trying to save us all." John knelt beside her, his heart heavy with regret. "Maybe, but you were trying to save yourself too, and in doing so you destroyed everything else." He stood, looking at the weapon one last time. This isn't about power, it's about choice, and I chose to stop the cycle. The rebels gathered around him, their faces filled with a mix of relief and gratitude. They had won, but John knew that the true victory was in the choice they had made, the choice to stop the cycle of destruction and create a new future. As the Queen was taken away, John looked at the stars outside the station's windows. The galaxy was still full of uncertainty, but for the first time, John felt a sense of peace. The weapon was no longer a tool of power. It was a reminder of the responsibility that came with great power and the importance of making the right choices.